Morantz. Julie?
Thank you so much. And I just want to say a huge thanks to all of the presenters. These were excellent presentations. And I'm only sorry that I have only 5 minutes to ask questions, since I have questions for all of you. The first one is going to be directed to Ms. Dzerowicz. You have mentioned that of the migrant workers, they have work permits, but they're tied to one job, and many of them have been laid off due to the pandemic. And they're often in areas that are essential services. So whether, I think you mentioned agriculture, I think you mentioned healthcare. And so I want to ask you the question. It seems a little odd that at a time where they're essential areas that they would be laid off. Can you just clarify that for me? You have to unmute yourself. Yes, thanks.
Yes, thanks. Thank you for the question. Well, we've seen a lot of workers being laid off in the home care sector. Particularly if their employers themselves have been laid off and are now at home and able to take care of the individuals that those home care workers were taking care of previously, or if employers are working from home, right, and are able to sort of share the responsibilities for taking care of a child or a person with a disability or a medical condition at home. We're also seeing layoffs, of course, in the restaurant sector. And in the tourism sector. So we know that there are a lot of migrant workers who've lost their jobs in those sectors, but they are interested in contributing, continuing to contribute to Canada in some way and are inspired to work where there are labor shortages, such as on farms, or some of those workers might have a background in healthcare and could utilize that during the pandemic.
So here's the other question I have for you. You had mentioned that when if a work permit has expired, then they don't have a choice. They can't work anywhere, and so they become sort of non-status here. My understanding is that if there was an application for renewal of the work permit that was expiring, so if the application put in before March 15th, there's an implied status that the work permit actually is renewed. Did you know that?
Yes. So in order to renew a work permit, a worker actually has to have all of their ducks in a row. So they have to have a new job offer, a new employment contract, and a new labor market impact assessment from the employer. So there are some workers who are on implied status and waiting to change jobs. There are also workers who were on implied status waiting to change jobs, and their employers who were hoping to hire them have told them perhaps that the job is no longer available. So we're seeing that in, of course, the restaurant sector, the tourism sector. So for these workers who, were not able to submit the applications to renew their work permits, or who have done so but lost, the offer of employment, they are also stuck.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pivot and I'm going to stay on this topic, but I'm going to pivot over to Mr. Gilroy over at the Canadian Horticultural Council. Mr. Gilroy, you had mentioned that, many farmers will only get a portion of the labor that they need. My understanding is that there were plane loads of migrants that were actually brought in to help support farmers. Is it that we didn't bring in enough? That's one. Two, was this a labor issue we had before the pandemic and it's actually exacerbated now? And then three, I'm assuming that there haven't been layoffs on farms, to Ms. Drolet's comment about for migrant workers, just because I'm assuming that they're much needed. So if you could just respond to that, because it seems like on the one hand we have some labor, but in other areas we don't.
Thank you for the question. You're absolutely right. In some sectors of agriculture, floriculture, for example, that business has been hit dramatically hard, and some of those workers have transferred to other farming operations. So to the best of my knowledge, anybody who has come into the country to work in agriculture, if that position was needed to be closed, that another job has been found for them. Mm-hmm. As far as the percentage of, just recently I saw some information that 85% of the workers have arrived that would normally arrive at this time. But for some growers, they haven't received any of their workers. Mm-hmm. And there are processing challenges that have made it extremely difficult. I know that in Quebec, they use a lot of Guatemalan workers, and I believe flights are just starting now. And workers were hoped to be in the fields a few weeks ago. So the challenge is great.
Okay, thank you all on that point. And just for Julie's information, we had a lot of workers from Jamaica turned back by a decision of the New Brunswick Premier this week, which puts New Brunswick in a bad position. Turning then